Good morning. John Gilkison here. It is Thursday, August 28th, 27th, pardon me, and 2020. And the other day I wrote a blog about absolutism and environmentalism don't mix. And what set me off was a YouTube show by John Cadogan out of Australia on the Hyundai Ioniq electric vehicle. And it was actually a pretty good show. He liked the vehicle, and he went through the charging realities with it and how he hadn't missed going to the gas station and so forth. But he still has a burr in his saddle about people who are evangelical or proselytizing about electric vehicles. And I think his animus is totally misplaced. I've come to the conclusion after listening to his comments about electric vehicles. For example, he calls Elon Musk Tesla Jesus and so forth, and he always accuses people who are wanting to promote electric vehicles of wanting to save the planet. Well, why wouldn't anyone want to save the planet if we're going to enter runaway global warming? But that's all beside the point. He prides himself, John Cadogan does, on facts and reason and his science and so forth. And yet when it comes to this particular issue, he seems to go off the rails and wants to bend over backwards logically and tie himself into pretzel knots over the idea of mass adoption of electric vehicles. And it's finally occurred to me what's wrong, what's going on here. And it seems to be that he's a, quote, auto journalist. He's been in the automotive business for quite a while, 20, 30 years, I'm just guessing, based on how old he looks. But I think his identity is completely tied up with fossil fuel cars. And electric vehicles represent a threat to that. But he won't say that because that's not factual. But I'm going to play a little snippet for you here of what the kind of stuff he's saying that kind of set me off to shoot this video. So let's do that. And
practicality, utility, usefulness, whatever. Some people say I am an EV hater, and I've copped that a fair bit, and I guess I deserved some of it, but it's actually not the case. I'm just not one of those crazy evangelical EV zealots whose divorce from reality is final. So let's talk about the facts and objective reality and why you might want to purchase one of these cars anyway without having that divorce that so many EV owners appear to have. Okay, so
I have no actual clue as to what he's talking about, what this divorce from reality is. The divorce from reality seems to be on his part. He seems to understand a lot of the facts, but he doesn't seem to grasp the significance of the fact that an electric vehicle has a brake-specific fuel consumption of from 1/3 to 1/4 of what a fossil fuel car has. We're at the limits of the technology for internal combustion. It's about as efficient as it's ever going to get, and wringing any more efficiency out of it you'd end up with contraptions that were several times more complicated than they already are, and it'd be very diminishing returns because of the laws of thermodynamics. But an electric vehicle automatically, with the input energy, can be 90% efficient, as compared to only 25% efficient for an internal combustion engine powered vehicle. So in what universe does driving cars that use from 1/3 to 1/4 the energy per mile to drive not reduce the environmental impacts of driving a vehicle? Well, that just begs the question. I mean, what's he talking about? The facts are that electric vehicles probably aren't going to save the planet, quote, and no one says they have to. Why is there this either or, black or white, situation always cropping up with regards to electric vehicles or renewable energy production and so forth? Why does it have to be perfect? Why does an electric car have to not only have zero emissions, but it can't be made out of metal and copper and things like that, and it can only be charged out of pure power sources? And we run into the same thing on turbines or solar panels. They have to be perfect. They literally should be invisible, and the electricity should just magically appear in your home with no physical instrumentality. You can't use copper or aluminum or rare earth metals to make any of these things without the detractors immediately jumping on it and saying they're no good. You know, you're a hypocrite. When the goal here is to reduce carbon emissions. And this is what these things can do. If you have solar panels on your house, and I do, and you charge your car using this solar power, you're driving with zero emissions for carbon, as well as zero air pollution at that juncture. Now, it may have entailed some carbon emissions to make the solar panels, and the same thing with making your car and so forth. But if you're an adult, you're going to say, well, this is way ahead of nothing. I'm not going to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And so there you are. It's and I don't view this kind of ad hominem attack, which is what it is, really. That's what he's gotten off the facts. And what it is he don't like green tree huggers. So that's his attack. Then when he gets back on the facts, he ignores anything that says that electric vehicles are really good. And so he's going to say, well, yeah, they're better for not polluting the air. So that's a valid reason to have them. Well, of course it is. And so anyway, I wrote a blog on this, and this is the way forward. This is, if the adults are in the room, and instead of peevish children who have to have everything perfect, having vehicles that use only 1/3 the energy to drive around, and can, with an internal combustion engine vehicle, you're never going to be able to get rid of gasoline and all of its attendant horrors. But with an electric vehicle, you have that option of not charging off the grid and putting up solar panels, or charging it off of wind power. And just because, for example, in John Cadogan's case in Australia, that they use more coal in many parts of the world, he thinks that that's a negative. Well, it is a negative, of course, but it's still a net benefit for driving electric vehicles, even with a coal-powered grid, is like they have in Australia. And I don't want to get into all the details of that, but even he acknowledges it. But however, the whole world isn't Australia. There's only 30 million people in Australia, so what's he talking about? Why is he making a general prescription for electric vehicles just based on what they do in Australia and the politics there? None of this makes any sense. And I told him, I said, all this is tied up with your personal identity, and in internal combustion engine driven cars, and you're bending over backwards and tying yourself into knots trying to explain this away because somehow it's threatening to you. And I just find it kind of sad because I admire the guy, and I do watch the show, and he has some good material occasionally, especially on logic and reason and science. But in this case, he's not even on the mark. He's not dealing in science. He's dealing in his personal picadillos with the green movement and people who would like to see us do better on not destroying the planet. And you can see how that would threaten his identity, because if it's hooked up with fossil fuel driven cars, then he has to minimize what driving them means. And he has to minimize what a big sea change driving electric cars would be. And they represent a quantum leap over internal combustion engine cars. And he knows it. That's the problem. So anyway, my point is this absolutism when it comes to the environment, it just doesn't mix. For some reason, for example, if you want to build a gas-fired power plant, it's okay to use steel and aluminum and copper wire and rare earth metals, whatever you want. It's fine as long as you're building a fossil fuel power plant. But as soon as you build wind turbines or you build solar panels, oh no, you've used all these polluting things. It's no good. Somehow you're inconsistent. But it's all comparative. Does one technology, is it an improvement over the other? Does it pollute less in its life cycle? That's what we're really about here. Currently, electric cars produce a little more carbon in their manufacture, but after a year or so of operation, it's completely negated. And they go on to not produce carbon emissions over their whole life. And not only that, there's reduced cost, there's reduced repair, there's reduced transportation costs from pollution to transport liquid fuels and to go get them and have oil spills. All this stuff is gone or can be made to disappear with electric vehicles. So yes, I'm an evangelical EV advocate, and I'd like to see the cost of them get down a little further. I'd like to see the battery density, power density of the batteries improve, and all that's happening. It's happening right now. And anyone who can be needs to be an early adopter to help promote them. And we're going to go from a plug-in hybrid electric to a pure electric vehicle in the next 18 months. So that's where I am. And I just hate to see this kind of absolutism pop up in regard to environmentalism and trying to mitigate global warming and air pollution and other toxic things being put into the environment. There is no perfect. If you're an adult in the room, you're going to find acceptable some payoffs, or some costs are going to be acceptable, and you have to weigh one thing to the other. These are comparative analysis. An electric car compared to an internal combustion engine, which has the best life cycle as far as mitigating climate change and mitigating pollution. So those are my thoughts on it, and I get really tired of seeing these peevish outbursts by so-called people who are logical and reasonable when they're not being. It's their identity that's all tied up in this, and they won't admit it. So we'll see you on down the road, everybody. Happy electric vehicle motoring. Later, bye.